Portrayed as the sharp-witted, business-savvy patriarch of the Harrison family, Rick Harrison became a cultural icon through his role on the hit reality television show Pawn Stars. On screen, he was the straight-talking leader, always ready with a clever one-liner and an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure items. He stood behind the counter like a pillar, calm, confident, and in control, negotiating deals with the precision of a seasoned trader and the charm of a showman. But, according to Corey, his son and fellow cast member, there's much more to his dad than meets the eye. Beyond the polished persona that fans saw week after week lies a man who carried burdens few ever realized. A man whose sacrifices and hidden struggles shaped not only his life, but the very foundation of the empire the Harrison family came to build. During a candid interview, Corey opened up about the private side of Rick that the cameras never captured. What emerged wasn't just a collection of anecdotes or a few sentimental memories. It was a deeply revealing portrait of a man who built a legacy through sheer willpower and relentless discipline. It was the story of the man behind the negotiations, behind the laughter, and behind the carefully edited episodes that entertained millions. This was Rick Harrison, stripped of the spotlight, seen through the eyes of his son, not as a star, but as a father, a fighter, and a deeply complex human being. Corey described the family struggles and the relentless grind of building an empire. From the ground up, in those early days when Pawn Stars was just a fledgling idea, success seemed anything but guaranteed. The shop itself, the now iconic gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, was once just a modest family business trying to survive in a sea of uncertainty. Rick didn't have producers or a camera crew back then. What he did have was grit, vision, and an uncompromising drive for excellence. One of the most surprising revelations Corey shared was Rick's intense perfectionism and the enormous pressure it placed on everyone around him, especially his family. It wasn't the kind of perfectionism that came from vanity or ego. It was rooted in fear, the fear of failure, the fear of losing everything, the fear that his best might not be enough. Especially during the early days of Pawn Stars, when the show's future was hanging by a thread, that perfectionism became a source of both motivation and conflict. He wasn't just the guy with the one-liners, Corey said, recalling those stressful years. He worked like a machine and expected everyone else to keep up. The standards were high, sometimes impossibly so, and while that helped fuel the show's meteoric rise, it also came at a cost. Corey admitted it wasn't easy living up to that. Behind the scenes, Rick demanded excellence in everything, from the way employees cataloged items to how they spoke to customers. Every detail mattered. Every mistake felt like a potential catastrophe. Corey also disclosed the emotional toll the show and the business took on Rick, especially as the spotlight grew brighter. While Rick projected confidence and control in front of the cameras, he often masked his stress and personal hardships with humor and sarcasm. It was a defense mechanism, Corey explained, a way of keeping the world at arm's length. Behind closed doors, he was far more vulnerable, Corey said. The man who had built his public image on stoicism and authority was, in private, someone haunted by past failures, financial risks, and the unrelenting responsibility of being the anchor of the family, both on and off screen. There were moments of deep loneliness, moments Rick rarely spoke about even to his closest confidants. He bore the weight of every decision, every misstep, every downturn in business, with an almost punishing sense of duty. He felt responsible for the family's well-being, for the shop's survival, and for the livelihood of everyone who worked there. To outsiders, he might have seemed invincible, but to Corey, he was a man constantly battling invisible enemies, doubt, regret, and a desire to prove himself again and again. One particularly startling confession involved Rick's secret health. battles in recent years, something he deliberately kept hidden from the public eye to maintain the image of strength and control. He'd go to work like nothing was wrong, even when he was in serious pain, Corey revealed. Whether it was back issues, fatigue, or more complex health conditions, Rick never wanted sympathy. He believed in carrying on, no matter the cost. To himself. "That's just who he is," Corey said, his voice tinged with both admiration and concern. He'd rather protect everyone else than show weakness. This revelation added a layer of humanity to a man many viewed as larger than a life. Fans had seen Rick laugh, joke, and hustle, but few ever imagined the silent suffering that happened off-screen. The reality was that Rick's commitment to protecting his family and preserving the business often meant sacrificing his own well-being. He rarely complained. He didn't talk about the sleepless nights, the doctor visits, or the painkillers that kept him going. He simply showed up because that's what leaders do. That's what fathers do. Beyond the personal struggles, Corey also shed light on his father's lesser-known passions, interests that painted a picture of a deeply thoughtful and intellectually curious man. While most viewers knew Rick as a street-smart dealer with an eye for antiques, fewer realized he had a fascination with philosophy, science, and obscure historical texts. These weren't just passing interests. They were lifelong pursuits that informed the way Rick saw the world. "He has this library in the house," Corey said, "full of ancient books and artifacts, stuff he's collected privately for decades." To Corey, this was the side of Rick that the world rarely saw, the quiet scholar, the man who found solace and stimulation in old manuscripts and forgotten knowledge. "Most people don't know," Corey continued, "but he's probably one of the smartest guys I've ever met." Rick's knowledge wasn't just useful for evaluating rare items, it was profound. He could quote Voltaire and explain the physics of a 17th-century timepiece in the same breath. He didn't flaunt it, didn't feel the need to prove his intellect, but when he spoke, there was weight behind his words, insight, perspective, a kind of depth that went beyond entertainment and into the realm of legacy. But the most emotional part of Corey's revelations centered on Rick's deep, unspoken love for his family. Despite the tough exterior and relentless work ethic, Rick's ultimate priority was always the shop, not for fame or fortune, but because he believed it was the one thing that could provide stability for generations to come. He saw the pawn shop not just as a business, but as a sanctuary, a place that could weather the storms of life and keep the family grounded. He sacrificed a lot, Corey said, his time, his health, his personal life, all to build something bigger than himself. Rick's motivations were rarely self-centered. He wanted his sons to have opportunities he never did. He wanted to create a legacy that outlived him. He wanted to ensure that when he was gone, the people he loved would be taken care of. It was this sense of duty that kept him going through the hardest times. Through illness, through criticism, through the emotional exhaustion that came with constantly being on, Rick pushed forward, not because he had to, but because he believed in what he was building. These revelations have caused a stir. Among fans, the interviewer noted, many of whom now see Rick Harrison in a new light. No longer just the tough negotiator and TV personality, Rick emerged from Corey's account as a deeply complex man who carried immense burdens with quiet strength. It was a sobering reminder that public personas often hide private truths, that the man fans admired for his wit and savvy was also someone who endured far more than anyone realized. As Corey's story spreads, it's becoming clear that the legacy of Rick Harrison goes far beyond reality TV. It's not just about the shop, the show, or the fame. It's about resilience, sacrifice, devotion. It's the story of a father who put his family first, even when it cost him everything else. It's the story of a flawed but fiercely loyal man who never gave up, who never gave in, and who never stopped fighting for the people he loved. The greatest treasure Rick Harrison ever held wasn't gold, silver, or a rare historical artifact. It was the bond of family. It was the strength to endure, the wisdom to lead, and the heart to protect, even when it meant suffering in silence. That's the Rick Harrison Corey knew. That's the Ricks. Harrison fans are just beginning to understand. And maybe, just maybe, that's the story worth telling most of all. Rick's story doesn't start with a pawnshop empire or television fame. It begins in the grit and dust of Las Vegas, in the lean years when everything was uncertain and the weight of survival sat heavy on his shoulders. Before Pawn Stars was even a thought, Rick Harrison was a young man navigating a volatile economy, hustling in the high-stakes world of secondhand goods. His father, Richard the Old Man Harrison, had started the gold and silver pawn shop with him in 1989, a time when Las Vegas was transforming from a gambler's haven into a booming entertainment capital. It was a risky move in a market flooded with competition, but Rick had something different, relentless vision. In those formative years, Corey witnessed the transformation of his father from a struggling businessman to a relentless entrepreneur. He was always thinking, always planning. Corey recalled, even when we didn't know where the next rent check was coming from, he was talking about building something that would last. It wasn't just ambition, it was obsession. Rick worked 12-hour days, sometimes more. He kept ledgers, studied markets, read books on appraisal methods, and memorized the nuances of obscure historical items. Every moment of free time was devoted to mastering his craft. He didn't have mentors, Corey said. He became one. That kind of self-taught mastery came with a cost. There were missed birthdays, dinners eaten in the shop office, weekends sacrificed to emergency inventory checks or auctions. While the rest of the world clocked out, Rick clocked in harder. To his family it was difficult, sometimes isolating. But to Rick, it was the only way. He didn't see it as abandoning them. He saw it as building for them. He believed if he just pushed a little harder, worked a little longer, he could give us all something no one could take away, Corey said. That same work ethic, honed in those hard years, translated directly into the persona the world would come to know on Pawn Stars. But it's easy to forget that the show didn't start as a juggernaut. Rick pitched the idea to dozens of networks before anyone even considered turning the pawn business into entertainment. Even then, the initial response was skeptical. Reality TV in the early 2000s was dominated by glitz, glamour, and high drama. A family-run pawn shop didn't exactly scream ratings gold, but Rick persisted, convinced that the unique mix of history, negotiation, and quirky personalities would resonate. He told everyone who'd listen that people would love learning about the strange items that came through the shop, Corey recalled. He believed knowledge was cool, way before that was a thing. When the show finally premiered in 2009 on the History Channel, it was modest. But thanks to Rick's authenticity and encyclopedic knowledge, viewers connected with the show, and with him. Soon, the pawn shop became a tourist destination. Rick, Corey, Chumley, and the Old Man were recognized worldwide. The fame brought opportunity, but also a whole new level of pressure. With millions of eyes watching, every episode became a performance, and every mistake felt magnified. It was a blessing and a curse, Corey said. We had everything we'd dreamed of, but it also meant my dad carried even more stress. He had to be the face, the brains, and the backbone. What few people saw was the toll it took. Rick's perfectionism, which had once been a tool for survival, became a constant internal pressure. He wasn't just responsible for his family anymore. He was responsible for the public image of an empire. The expectation to always have the right answer, to always be entertaining, to never falter, those were burdens that Rick carried quietly. Corey often noticed his dad spacing out in the shop, lost in thought, as if trying to mentally juggle 1,000 responsibilities. Sometimes Rick would disappear into his personal library, where rare volumes lined the walls like old friends. There, surrounded by the ideas of philosophers and historians long gone, he found moments of peace. He'd sit there reading some 16th century book about European trade routes, Corey said, chuckling, and he'd be happy. That was his recharge. The books weren't just about knowledge, they were a refuge. In those quiet hours, Rick wasn't a boss, a father, or a celebrity. He was just a man who loved learning, but even those escapes couldn't shield him from the physical and emotional toll of years of overwork. Corey noted that his father had endured more than one health scare, incidents that were deliberately kept private. He'd never let on, Corey emphasized. Even when he was hurting, he'd get up, put on his work shirt, and go open the shop. It wasn't just physical pain either. The emotional exhaustion ran deep. Years of being the anchor, the fixer, the planner, it all added up. And yet Rick never wavered. He believed showing vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. Corey often found himself caught between admiration and worry. He respected his father's drive, but he also saw the cost of it. "I think the saddest part is that he never really allowed himself to rest," Corey said. "Even when he was sick, he kept moving. It's like he didn't know how to stop." That relentless forward motion came from fear as much as determination. Rick had seen too many people lose everything in Las Vegas. He'd watched families crumble under debt, watched businesses vanish overnight. He didn't just want to succeed, he wanted to ensure that what he built would survive him. Despite everything, the thing Rick valued most wasn't the shop or the fame, it was his family. Corey spoke at length about his father's unspoken love, the kind that didn't always come in hugs or words, but in actions. He wasn't the kind of dad who'd sit you down for heart-to-hearts, Corey said, but he was the kind of dad who'd stay up all night trying to figure out how to pay for your school. Rick showed love by showing up, by being there, by fighting for stability even when it meant putting himself last. He believed the pawn shop could be the thing that held us together, Corey explained, that if we had the shop, we'd always have a home base, a purpose. That belief ran deep. Rick viewed the business as a generational stronghold, something his sons and their sons could inherit. That's why every decision was made with the long game in mind. He wasn't just thinking about profits, he was thinking about legacy. As the show's popularity soared, that legacy became more complicated. Fame brought